In this video, I'd like to show you what I think is a very nice new feature in PHP 8, attributes. You can think of attributes as a way of adding metadata to classes, methods, functions, arguments, and more in a structured way. In the second part of the video, I'll guide you through the code of a package where attributes are used extensively. Let's start with a simple example. So let's define our first attribute. I'm going to create a directory here, attributes, and create a class. I'm going to name this class my first attribute because you can see an attribute as a kind of special class. Attributes you define should be marked with the global attribute class, like this, attribute. So PHP knows that we're creating an attribute here. And in this attribute class, you can define what data it holds and what behavior it has. Let's add a constructor here. And let's use the fancy property promotion to add an argument, like that. Now that we defined our first attribute, let's use it on a class. I'm going to create a new class here. So this here is test class. And I'm going to add some metadata to this test class by applying our own attribute here. So this is my first attribute. And you can see that it expects us to pass that argument. I'm going to pass my value here. Next, let's take a look at how we can retrieve this value. Let's do that in this test command class that I can easily execute. The first thing that you must do is instantiate reflection class. So we're going to reflect on our test class. And let's put that in a variable, reflection class. Did I make a typo here? Reflection class, like that. Let's import this. It's complaining about something. I should import that as well. And on that reflection class, and this is a new method, you can get the attributes that are defined on that class. So here we have the attributes. And this returns an array because attributes are always applied as arrays. You see the array notation here. So if you want to have like another attribute here, we could just apply the same one here again. But in most cases, you'll apply something else here. Okay, so this is an array. Let's take a look at it. So I'm going to dd it. If you're not familiar with Symfony or Laravel, which is kind of hard to imagine, this stands for die and dump. So we're going to see this value. So I'm going to execute get attributes here. You can see that we get an array that holds one reflection attribute here. We're not going to loop over this, but we're going to just grab the first one here in this simple example. And now we have the reflection attribute. And how you get to your defined attribute is by calling new instance on this. Let's see what we get now. And now you can see we have my first attribute. And we can reach in here and get my value out of there. So here I can do my argument. Let's run it again. And now we have my value. You might think, for what can this be used? And I'm going to answer that in a bit by showing you the more complex example, my package code. But I want to show you one thing more here. Let's go to the attribute. And a thing that you can define here is where this attribute may be used. So you can give it an argument and you can say, hey, this attribute is meant to be used on a class. And if we go to our class where we use that attribute, you see no complaints here. But if I change this to target method and go to the test class again, then you see that PHP Storm gives us a warning. Attribute cannot be applied to the class. And I haven't tested this out, but I bet that this will blow up now. And sure enough, it does. Let's change this back to target class and demonstrate one more thing here. Named arguments are also available in attributes. So if I have multiple arguments here, my second argument, and this one is optional, and I'm going to have my third argument, like that. Let's go to the test class. And here I can use a named argument. So third argument, my third argument, third one. And let's fetch all arguments again. So I'm going to leave off my argument here so we see the entire instance. Let's run get attributes again. And sure enough, we have our third argument here as well. So yeah, kind of cool that you can use named properties here. Of course, you can also add functions to attributes. So public, maybe get uppercased my argument, something like that. This will return a string. And we're going to do string to upper of my argument. Let me copy this. With this method defined, I can call it here as well, like that. Let's run it, and we get the uppercase value. So that's all nice in theory, but let's take a look at a bigger example. Let me switch to a package that I've created that uses attributes extensively. Let's first head to the README to discover what this package does. This is a Laravel specific package, but I'm sure that even without Laravel knowledge, you'll be able to follow everything that I'm going to say. The goal of this package is to automatically register routes in the Laravel application. So normally you add routes in a routes file, but using this package, you can add attributes to your controller methods, and routes will automatically be registered for them. So this attribute, it will automatically register this route. So we have a get route because we use the get annotation. The passed argument is used as a route, and the controller and method used correspond to the controller and the method where the attribute is applied on. The package has a few more attributes and features, like you see here, but let's just focus on get here. Let's go to the test that proves that this actually works. So it's the get attribute test. And let's execute this test so we know for certain that the functionality is working. And of course, we get green. In this package, I created something that I call a route registrar. And this class can reflect on classes given and use the attributes to register routes. In the test, I manually pass a class to it. But if you'd use this package in a real-life application, then the registrar could loop through all your controllers and add them in one go. But that's an implementation detail where I don't want to focus on. Let's go to the test controller. So here you can see that we apply that get attribute. Let's take a look at the definition of that get attribute. So I've put all the attributes of this package in their own attributes namespace. The get class is marked as an attribute, and I'm using that target thingy that I've shown you before, where I ensure that this attribute is only applied on methods. You can see that this attribute accepts certain parameters, and the first one is that URI. And I don't want to focus on this too much, but like regular classes, attribute classes can extend other ones as well. Attributes can also implement certain interfaces, and all the attributes from this package implement the route interface, which is an empty marker interface, which will be used later on. For now, just remember the get attribute is a simple attribute that just accepts a couple of arguments. Now let's take a look at how we retrieve those arguments. So let's get back to our test and go to the implementation of register class. Currently, this is now simply the first to process attributes for the class. And here you can see what I showed you earlier. We are going to reflect over the class. Then we are going to get the class route attributes, and I'm going to skip over this for now and immediately jump to this. In the previous simple example, I've showed you how you can get an attribute for a class, but here in our test controller, let's view it one more time, you can see that I applied it on a method. So we are going to use our reflection class to get all the methods and loop over them, and for each method, we are going to get the attributes. In the previous simple example, you've seen me getting all attributes, but you can also get attributes from a certain class. So if I were to do this, then I would only get the route attribute, which doesn't make sense in this context because route attribute is an interface. But if I add that second flag here, then I get all attributes that implement that interface, which is quite nice. Because if on the controller there would be other attributes here that were defined by somebody else and are not part of the package, those are now get filtered out here. We only get our own attributes that are present in this package. Okay, we now have all our attributes here, and let me die and dump that. And run the test so you can see that we have one reflection attribute here. So again, this returns an array because attributes are being applied on in an array. We're going to loop over each attribute and instantiate it. Let's take a look at what is inside attribute classes. And you can see that we have our get attribute here with the URI and the method name defined. We pass through this if the class is an instance of route. You can't see it in the dump, but get actually extends route. So we get through here. And I'm not going to go into details here, but all of this information is used to register a new route on the router, which was passed to the constructor of the route register. Here it is. And you can see that it is a router, an Illuminate routing router. Let's scroll back down to where we were. So you can see that we get method here from our attribute class, which is set to get. We call that HTTP method. So we call get here with the URI from the attribute class, which is here. And here we'll have an array with the action, which this is the controller name, and this is the method name. And that is basically the heart of the package. We use the values in these annotations to register routes on the router. I think this package is a nice example of the things you can do with PHP 8 attributes. If you want to know more about the package and how it uses PHP 8 attributes, head over to its repository on GitHub. You'll find a link to it in the notes below this video.